I'm Tara Garrard. I'm a cereal pathologist at SARDI at the Wake campus in South Australia. So in the medium rainfall zone in the southern region, I'd say some of the most common factors that are creating risk for fungicide resistance are growing susceptible varieties or very susceptible varieties, crop rotations and having limitations in our crop rotations. So for example, growing barley on barley, and high disease levels. So the more disease that we have, the more opportunities there are for fungicide resistance to occur and continue to develop. So anything that we're doing to limit that is helping to limit our risk of fungicide resistance. So in the southern region, we've got the net form net blotch fungicide resistance to SDHIs in fluxapyroxad. And we initially saw that on the Yorke Peninsula in 2019. And as time's gone on, we've continued to see that develop separately in other regions, as well as that initial source of resistance moving around as well. There's the wheat powdery mildew on the Yorke Peninsula, which has developed resistance to the strobilurins. And we see that as providing an ongoing threat. So in our barleys, the diseases that are at highest risk are the ones that have the most rapidly evolving pathogen populations, the ones that we see the highest level of disease pressure, and the spot form and net form net blotch fall into that category, as well as the powdery mildew. So in net form net blotch, we have some cases of fungicide resistance already. The spot form net blotch, at the moment, we're not seeing any in South Australia, but we know that that's developed in other regions like Western Australia. Powdery mildew in barley is one that we really don't see very commonly in South Australia. It would be at higher risk if we had much higher disease levels here. So in our fungicide mode of action groups, we've got varying levels of risk associated with those groups. So we have the QOIs, the strobilurins, the DMIs, the azoles, as well as the SDHIs that are commonly used for barley control in South Australia. The SDHIs and the QOIs are probably at the highest risk. And these are known to have a mutation that causes breakdown in the resistance, and that can be done in one step. Whereas the DMIs, we have more actives that are available within that group, but additionally, it's a stepwise change. So we have multiple mutations that need to occur in order for the resistance to develop there. So in our wheats, once again, the diseases that are at the highest risk of fungicide resistance developing are the ones that have got the fast moving and diverse pathogen populations, the ones where we see the highest level of disease pressure in South Australia. And so for those, the Septoria triticide blotch and the wheat powdery mildew are the ones that predominantly come to mind. We have the same three groups of fungicides that are registered for use in our wheat diseases, so the SDHIs, the QOIs and the DMIs. And so we have the same risks associated there with those. So the SDHIs and the QOIs, they can have a single mutation that causes a breakdown, and we have the resistance following from those. So they're at quite high risk. So in our DMIs, this requires a stepwise change, and it's not just a single mutation that's occurring. So we have a breakdown that happens in a progression, and we can kind of track that and follow it over time and see it as it's happening. So off-target resistance is where we see fungicide resistance developing for a pathogen that we've not initially been applying fungicide for. And we know that it's pretty rare to see just one single pathogen occurring in a paddock at any one time. That's not really how the real world works. Often we've got multiple pathogens at play, and they'll be at varying levels. We'll have one major one that we really want to get under control and that we're targeting, but there might be some others that are sitting at low levels or of less concern in the background. So when we're applying our fungicide for that primary pathogen that we're targeting, we're also having an impact on those other minor pathogens that are sitting in the background. So we need to be aware of that because there is the potential that fungicide resistance can develop in those minor pathogens that are sitting there as well. And that's what off-target resistance is. So we know that the more spores of a particular pathogen that are around in a paddock, the higher the chances there are going to be of fungicide resistance developing. So one of the key ways that we can help to avoid fungicide resistance is by keeping the levels of inoculum as low as possible. And there's lots of different ways that we can do this. If we think about it as a pyramid, at the bottom, our kind of biggest and first choice should be about our variety selection. And we know that we've got different resistance ratings for any particular disease. So if we can try and avoid varieties that have a very susceptible or susceptible resistance rating, then we're going to significantly reduce the amount of inoculum that's produced within a season. The next part of that pyramid is talking about our other disease management strategies. And this includes our crop rotation. So what are we planting into? Trying to avoid sowing the same crop for 2 seasons in a row. What are our stubble retention systems? And are we working with a pathogen that is predominantly transferred on the stubble? Is it a disease that can move from season to season via a green bridge? And are we looking at managing our green bridge? And then right at the top of our pyramid, we've got the fungicide applications. And when we're considering fungicide applications, we should be using them as strategically as possible and only when they need to be applied. Within this, we want to make sure that we're avoiding using the same mode of action twice in any one season, as well as using mixtures when possible and sticking to our label rates. So when we're thinking about how growers can go about reducing the pressure of fungicide resistance developing in their fungicide applications, then we need to be thinking about what current fungicide resistances we've got in the region and trying to avoid any of those particular fungicides. Having a fungicide management strategy that's likely to yield results for the crop and the pathogen that we're working in. And from there, making sure that we're sticking with our label rates, using any one mode of action only once within a season, as well as using fungicide mixtures when possible. So we know that the pathogen populations that we're working with for some of these diseases, netform net blotch in barley is a good example, are incredibly diverse and they can move quite quickly and adapt to what we're seeing in our growing system. We've seen this happen in the netform net blotch where a variety can start off with a not too bad resistance rating. As we see that particular variety grown more and more densely across a region, then it's really putting pressure on the genetics that are behind that resistance. What the pathogen is then capable of doing is adapting and creating virulence for that pathogen, and it will work away until basically it overcomes any of the genetic resistance that's available. We can then see a transition from a variety that say came out as MS down to something that's ended up as VS as we've moved through the seasons and had more pressure on that particular disease.